you everyone for joining us here. Thank you everyone for joining us here today. I see that Kelsey's got it already unlocked with the recording, which is great. So we'll go through and skip that slide. But yeah, we are recording today's session for everyone who's unable to attend this live webinar. So we hope that everyone is okay with that. I'm going to start us off with a treaty acknowledgement. So good morning, everyone. My name is Kayla Belovich. I was born and raised in Amiskwachi, Waskekagan, colonially known as Edmonton, within Treaty 6 territory, which is where I'm speaking from today. I'm a fourth generation Canadian of mixed settler European descent who recognizes that my journey towards reconciliation begins by acknowledging how my family's success and prosperity would not be made possible without residing on these stolen lands. So I hope to continue to educate myself on decolonization, uplift and celebrate the Indigenous peoples of this land, and upon invitation to do so, support them in the pursuit of self-determination, sovereignty, and justice. In the spirit of respect and reciprocity, we acknowledge that the lands within the watershed of the North Saskatchewan River are in Treaty 6, Treaty 8, and the Métis homeland. These lands are the traditional territories, traveling routes, and gathering places of the Cree, Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Métis, Dene, Stoney, and Nakota Sioux. We recognize the contributions of Indigenous peoples who have cared for this land since time immemorial, and whose rich histories, cultures, languages, and presence continue to enrich these sacred lands that we all steward as treaty people. The NSWA recognizes the role of watershed management and its practitioners in perpetuating a colonial system that excludes and ignores perspectives offered by Indigenous cultures, teachings, and science. We make the statement as an affirmation that we are committed as an organization to improving the practice of watershed stewardship. And I invite you all to recognize the land in your own way and to learn and grow so that we may advance reconciliation together. So if you're willing to do so, please enter in the chat the treaty or traditional territory from which you are joining us today. And get on to the next. So welcome again to the fall speaker series of NSWA's online Watershed Wednesdays. As I said before, my name is Kayla Belovich. I'm a watershed planning technician here at NSWA, and I have the privilege of being your host this afternoon. I am joined today by several NSWA staff and board members, and I encourage them to say hi in the chat. And today's webinar is the second of three being held this fall. We'll hear today about trout from Lesley Peterson and sturgeon from Dr. Stephen Spencer. Both of our speakers will be sharing their knowledge, experience, and expertise about fish populations within the watershed. So for a little housekeeping, we're dividing the sessions into two with one speaker in each half of the webinar. There will be time for questions at the end of each presentation. So we ask that if you have any questions, please put them in the chat and we will get to them after each presentation. If we can, or if we cannot, we can also provide contact information if you're really curious about learning more. And if everyone can also please keep your videos off and keep your microphone muted so that we have more bandwidth available for smoother presentations. So we are going to be asking a couple of poll questions today as well. And the first one is about to go up by our lovely lady Kelsey. Not sure if it's running.
Which sector do you represent? Yeah, it shows up there. Yeah, no.
Oh, perfect. Yeah. I can't see it.
So we're getting quite a few responses. So far, it looks like taking the lead is NGO. Definitely have some good representation across the board, some industry, municipal government, and a few more coming in, but I think I'll maybe stop it there and share the results. So 26% of our participants today are from NGO. We have both 9% of municipal and provincial government. We also have 12% interested citizen, which is great to see, 21% industry, and some watershed stewardship groups as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Kelsey. Good to see that we have a nice mix of people coming in from everywhere. Going on to the next slide. So some of you guys have already met Kelsey. She is one of our NSWA Watershed coordinators, and she has the awesome challenge of randomly picking one of our webinar guests, so one of you guys, to receive a kind of custom NSWA gift basket with almost one of a kind NSWA swag. So yeah, stay tuned because we'll draw the winner at the end of this webinar. And the webinar today marks the second of our Fall Watershed webinar series, as I already mentioned. And all of these Watershed Wednesday webinars are recorded, and the links will be available on our YouTube channel, as they're also posted on the NSWA website. So we've had excellent speakers on a variety of topics in the past, so it'd be great if you guys wanted to check them out and learn more. So our first presentation today is about trout in our watershed, and it will be presented by Lesley Peterson from Trout Unlimited. Lesley is a Trout Unlimited Canada's Alberta biologist and has been with the organization for 14 years. Her role involves managing the organization's conservation and restoration programming in Alberta, with much of her work focused on native trout recovery along Alberta's eastern slope regions. In her spare time, Lesley enjoys cycling, cross-country skiing, reading, and cooking, which is awesome. So without further ado, I'll let Lesley take it away and share her screen.
All right, hello everybody. Get my screen shared here. Thanks for bearing with me on this technological adventure. Okay, does that work?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, great. So the North Saskatchewan River and the watershed holds a special place in my heart because I grew up along the North Saskatchewan River next to the Wingard Ferry, if anyone knows where that is in Saskatchewan, just down from Fort Carlton. Gives you another little clue. So yeah, I'm happy to be working in and talking about the work that we do in the North Sask. So a little bit about our organization. Trout Unlimited Canada is a national organization. We're a registered charity, and I work out of the Calgary office, but we also have an office in Guelph, Ontario, but members and chapters across the country. Our priorities are water quality and quantity, aquatic communities, and aquatic habitat. So not just fish, not just trout. Our work involves conservation and restoration. It's all guided by science, and we have education components incorporated into most of our work. And the specific things that we typically are trying to do is addressing threats on the landscape like water temperature, water quality. We are trying to improve connections within watersheds and connecting people to watersheds. We do a lot of species at risk recovery work and protecting habitat. So in Alberta, a lot of our work is focused on these native trout species. And these three, I'll introduce you to these three trout on the screen: Athabasca rainbow trout, West Slope cutthroat trout, and bull trout. These are all of Alberta's native stream-dwelling trout, and all of them are considered at risk. So where they live is showed on the screen, and maybe a little bit hard to read, but basically bull trout is this kind of tan range, so all along the eastern slopes. Athabasca rainbow trout, this is Alberta's only native rainbow trout species. So when you see rainbow trout anywhere other than the Athabasca watershed, they come from a non-native stocked stock. And so the range here shows this whole Athabasca watershed, but in reality, they're really limited to headwater tributaries. And then cutthroat trout, West Slope cutthroat trout, they come from the Old Man and Bow watersheds. So in the North Saskatchewan, we have bull trout. So that's what I'm gonna mostly talk about today. So bull trout, they are designated as our provincial fish emblem. Since 1995, I believe they got that designation. But they've suffered range-wide declines over the last century due to a variety of threats. At the early settler times, I guess they were persecuted, maybe still are to some degree today. Sometimes considered trash fish because they were undesirable in terms of sport fishing. So a lot of other trout species were stocked, and there's stories of people, catching bull trout and throwing them in the bush because they didn't like them. They've gone through a little bit of a PR challenge over time, but I think they're gaining in appreciation. But besides that, they have suffered from a variety of other things like habitat loss and fragmentation, those interactions with non-native species, and continuous angling pressure and climate change as well. So one thing about bull trout is that they're quite long-lived for as fish. They can live upwards of 20 years, but they also have a relatively sort of they're slow to reach sexual maturity, so it could be 6 years before they're ready to spawn, whereas some non-native fish like brook trout, they're ready to spawn at age 2 or 3. So yeah, that's one of the challenges that face, one of the natural limitations, I guess, facing bull trout. They also have a couple of really cool different life history strategies. So there are some bull trout that we would call resident bull trout that reside in smaller streams, they're natal streams that they were born in. But you also have migratory bull trout, which is pretty cool because they might grow as juveniles in their natal stream for a few years, then move into larger river systems or even lakes, get big, and then come back annually or every second year to spawn. So it's kind of cool. They also, like all of our native trout, require clean, cold, complex, and connected water. So the 4 C's. So when we look at bull trout, this is their historic adult density based throughout their range. This is from the provincial government's Fish Sustainability Index. And this is like a report card looking at the status in the different watersheds. So green is good, red is bad. But this shows that there are some natural limitations. So this is historic, and unfortunately, the situation today is a little less good, with a lot more of those red or even gray, which means that they're functionally extirpated or essentially lost. So this can seem a little bit overwhelming and concerning, and it is certainly. So how did we get there? There's a variety of threats, like I mentioned, and the province uses a cumulative effects model that is called the JOE model to examine the various threats and how they interact with each other to identify within those watersheds, what are the specific threats that are driving those populations. So in some cases, it could be a combination of multiple threats interacting with each other. And in some watersheds, it may be, like, for example, hybridization and competition may be worse in some places than others, whereas fragmentation could be worse in some places than others. So it helps to identify what levers can be pulled to help recover fish more strategically. So it's, can be quite overwhelming. How do we fix this problem? You see all that red on the landscape. How do we fix it? For us as an organization, we are not a regulator, but we see ourselves as a facilitator and a doer. So our strength as an organization is our tenacity and our ability to get work done on the ground while also building partnerships and support. So the threats that we are trying to make a change on specifically a lot of it is towards habitat fragmentation and degradation. And so with that I'm talking about water quality and habitat and access to habitat. So we're trying to work on those 4 C's, making the habitat more connected, more complex, and cleaner. We also, through our work, trying to build support and create allies through our communication efforts. We don't do it alone. We work with a lot of other partners, and in Alberta, we're lucky to have an Alberta Native Trout Collaborative that came together in 2019, I believe. So it's a provincially led collaborative, and we have a number of NGO partners involved. And the idea here is, well, it started because we got some funding through the federal government, through the Canada Nature Fund for aquatic species at risk. And but ultimately, we're trying to become more strategic to avoid those random acts of stewardship that maybe we were all trying to do, so we can be a little bit better coordinated and strategic in our recovery efforts. And each partner, each member of the collaborative can work towards their strengths and move the dial. So I wanted to highlight some stuff in the North Saskatchewan Basin, and we've actually been quite active here since about 2017. We've had several projects on the go in the watershed. So in the Tay River, which is in the Clearwater River system west of southwest of Rocky Mountain House, for a number of years, we've been working with some partners to look for clues as to why bull trout numbers are low, and we're trying to determine if and how we can bolster those numbers. So over the years, we ran a fish trap and did a tagging program to identify if there's still a spawning run from the Clearwater River up into the Tay. We've done electrofishing, eDNA sampling, temperature monitoring, looking at identifying sediment sources and remediating some of those issues. And other partners are also working on watercourse crossing remediation. In Fall Creek and Rocky Creek, Fall Creek is in the Ram and Rocky in the Clearwater. We've repaired dozens of stream crossings through our remediation efforts, and there's ongoing monitoring in those systems. And then at Cutoff Creek, just this year, in September, we installed a bridge with some partners and did some ford removal, removing off-highway vehicle fords from that creek. And then in Radiant Creek, which is also in the Clearwater, we've been adding woody debris structures to the creek to add structure and complexity. So this is a technique we're trying using low-tech process-based restoration, focusing on using stream power rather than diesel power to restore our streams. So again, all of this work again is focused on those 4 C's: cold, clean, complex, connected. But I want to add another C, which might be community. So throughout the work, we're trying to build community support for recovery efforts. So there's the North Saskatchewan. So I wanted to highlight Rocky Creek just as an example, sort of a case study, I guess, of one of the projects that we're really proud of. So this is a tributary of the Clearwater River, as I mentioned. It does provide some habitat for bull trout. And in, I think it was 2017, Alberta Environment and Parks, the rec management team did some assessment of the watershed and others in the region to identify restoration opportunities and needs. And they identified quite a few issues with the OHV trail system. So this is, I should mention too, it's not a public land use zone, so there is no designated trail system in this watershed, but there were on average 6 crossings per kilometer with lots of sedimentation issues and the trail running through the riparian. And there was, in this case, no real opportunity for realigning those trails. So what we did, we went and visited the site in October to look at, okay, maybe we can plan some work there in the following year. But right away, we saw bull trout actually stranded in some of the ruts and areas where the trail system had captured stream flow and was at risk of freezing and drying up right away. So this triggered an emergency response. And right away, we carried out a fish salvage, a rescue to move some of those fish from those stranded, isolated areas back into the active channel. A consultant was hired to create a reclamation plan in short order. Approvals were required and all of the ducks in a row to carry out some restoration work in the short term. So this is the area just sort of near the Forestry Trunk Road. We identified this whole area as the sort of restoration area. And in the following spring, we went back with some volunteers and did a whole bunch of willow planting at most of the crossings. And at the way we actually reclaimed some of those fords and those crossings is things like log crib walls. So this helps both deter access, making it difficult or impossible to use as a motorized ford, but also encouraging plant growth and recovery and allowing the site to recover. So it actually works really well. Like you can see this is a kind of a like immediately after and then a few years later after, things greening up really well. So in summary, at Rocky Creek, we did restoration and bioengineering at 31 crossings. We planted over 4,000 willow stakes and 4,000 spruce seedlings. The motorized access was by downing trees and using rough and loose. So rough and loose is like using an excavator to loosen up and fluff up the soil, both to restrict motorized access where you don't want it, and also decompacts the soil and allows vegetation to grow, and creates like a place where you can actually plant stuff. Did some signage and some outreach and communication. And what was lucky, I suppose, AP had done some fisheries sampling beforehand, so they had a really good before benchmark or baseline. And so a whole study design was developed around this, and Fall Creek, I should mention too, because we did a very similar project the following year on Fall Creek. So we did a backy design, which is before after control impact. So that way you're using data from before and after and looking at the treatment stream and control streams, so that you can account for natural variability and assess if the work that we did is having an effect on the bull trout population. So I threw this slide up that we got from fisheries management, and this is very preliminary data just from the first couple of years. I think this year was the 5th year of sampling, so we're very excited, anticipating the results of the study. But so far, it looks positive in that, when you compare before and after and look at the control streams, the reference streams, it does look like bull trout numbers are increasing. Very encouraging. And then the other thing we're doing in the North Saskatchewan, and I apologize because these signs are actually in the Red Deer, but we do have some signs up in the North Saskatchewan watershed. We've been installing some stream crossing signage, and this is modeled after similar signs that you probably see when you're driving through BC, identifying salmon habitat. And so we want to highlight and build awareness and appreciation for native trout habitat in Alberta. And so we've worked with a number of municipalities to install these signs along crossings where native trout exist. And I think, a lot of times I talk to people up at a stream or they see a creek and they don't believe that there's fish in it, let alone native trout. And so it builds some appreciation for those habitats. And through our Native Trout Collaborative, we've also got a website and with additional communication stuff to kind of encourage more action by Albertans on what you can do to help protect native trout in your own daily life. So I would encourage folks to visit albertanativetrout.com for some additional resources. And yeah, I mean, what's the point of all of this? Why do we care? Well, I mean, not everyone appreciates fish or cares about fish, which is fine, I guess. But I will highlight that fish are, especially our native trout, can really be the canaries in the coal mine. And so they're telling us when things are not well. So, it's not just maybe threatened species that we're seeing, but threatened landscapes. And so the trout are sort of a product of their watershed, and what happens on the land affects what happens in the water, and specifically with the animals, like the fish that live in those waters. So the issue is not specific to just Alberta or just the eastern slopes. We have a global freshwater biodiversity crisis underway. And I think there's a lot of value in doing work to protect these landscapes and the fish and other wildlife that live within those areas. Because if it's good for fish, it's good for us too. So those landscapes provide a lot of other benefits in terms of resiliency and water for all of us. So we can do this. We can fix things. And that's it. I'll leave it at that. I didn't want to take up too much time, and provide a little time for questions. Should I stop sharing my screen now, Kayla?
You can if you want.
There was lots of questions that came through, so we won't be able to get to all of them, unfortunately, but perhaps we'll do kind of a follow-up. So I'll kind of maybe group two of them, if anything. How can, from Catherine, how can municipalities and perhaps even like volunteers help habitat and conservation and restoration in the watershed?
So municipalities specifically?
I didn't speak to that.
Yeah, so I think, well, one is if you want to partner with us and do some of those stream crossing signs on your municipal roadways, that would be great. We can help provide the design and some advice and on where to put them. And we've identified a number of stream crossings where they could go. So that's a great opportunity. Yeah, and then the other one is road crossings. So a lot of our stream crossings that are fragmented on the landscape occur on municipal roads. And I know a lot of municipalities are working really hard to those issues. And there are, I think there is still funding and resources available through the provincial government for remediating those. And but yeah, I would encourage, and if folks want to, apply for funding or need help or advice, I mean, I'm happy to talk about, funding opportunities for fixing some of those municipal road crossing issues.
Awesome, thank you. And another one, were bull trout historically around the Edmonton area, or what was their kind of historical range throughout the NSR?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yes, I think there are historic anecdotes of bull trout down in Edmonton and in the Red Deer, down to Red Deer. So yeah, it's hard to imagine, but yeah, they did have quite a long range before. And honestly, we're probably not going to go back to those days. We have to be kind of pragmatic in our approach to recovery. We can't bring them back everywhere they used to be. There is so much has happened in the landscape in the last century. But it's, I think, important to remember that they were there because it kind of helps frame where we want to go in the future.
Very true, thank you. And then I'll pass it to Kayla to introduce the next speaker.
Yeah, for sure. We actually do have a poll question to do. So our next topic is on recovering sturgeon in Alberta. And if Kelsey wants to launch the poll, will I share my screen to give the speaker bio after? That'd be great.
The poll is up there. So how long do you think sturgeon can live? Always a good question. So far, I think we have a little bit of mixed answers, but definitely a majority in one of them. I'll probably end there and share the results. So 89% think over 100 years, and then kind of a mix between the 10, 30, and 55 years. So stay tuned. Go ahead, Kayla. Definitely the majority was over 100 years.
Oh, sorry. I think I accidentally unshared Stephen's screen. Sorry, Stephen. But yeah, Stephen is a fisheries biologist employed by the Alberta government since 1999, working primarily in the North Saskatchewan drainage area. He has a Master's of Science in Biology focused on fisheries management and ecology and a PhD in conservation biology. He works on Alberta's difficult fish problem of a rapidly increasing human population with comparatively few water bodies. So I will let Stephen take it away in his awesome presentation. And also thank you, Lesley, for your great presentation there too. So yeah.
Is that presenting okay?
Yeah, we can see your screen just great.
Okay, well, thanks so much for inviting me today, and thanks, Lesley, for that. That was very interesting and so exciting to see numbers build after all that hard work that was done up there. So yeah, nicely done. Yeah, I just very quickly, I put my email address here. If there's questions, we probably will run out of time by the looks of things. So feel free to reach out if we don't get a chance to get to your questions. Today I was asked, well, I was asked today to talk about sturgeon, and so it was wide open. And being kind of a fish nerd, I thought I'd dive into the biology and some of the history on sturgeon, which I find fascinating. I hope you do too. So I'll get into it here. This is a photo given to us by one of our volunteer anglers, Jeff Krakowski, and he our sturgeon program really depends on volunteers, and Jeff's done a ton of stuff and shared some of his photos, which is beautiful. So just very quickly, as far as an outline, just I want to talk a little bit about sturgeon facts because they're such a fascinating fish, really, really different, really cool. Talk about some of the history of what's happened in Alberta, where they live in Alberta, what their current status is, and what we're doing to help. So in 2019, the NSWA invited me to give a presentation, and I talked about some of the difficulties that fish have living in Alberta. So I'm not going to talk about how far north we are and what low productivity you have as you move further north, and I won't talk about how abundant resources have brought a lot of humans to Alberta, which has resulted in a lot of development and fishing pressure and all the things that come with humans. And this photo is a fish tournament. We've used it a lot, but people are parked on the shore here at Pigeon Lake, and this is a grid of people fishing. So I'm not going to talk about how Alberta is a pressure point for fisheries management. Talk more about sturgeon. So sturgeon are really a neat fish. They have a tail like a shark. They don't have scales. They have a smooth skin. They're not a slimy fish. Very, very different from our other fish. They have an amazing sense of smell. These barbels are covered in olfactory glands and in the rostrum as well, the nose of the fish. And so they have an excellent sense of smell. They have a mouth like a vacuum. So the photo on the right here, you can see how it's extended. And so they suck up stuff that they eat along the bottom. They're not a predatory fish, but they do eat things like crayfish or mollusks, that sort of thing in the river. And then also, they can scavenge as well. They have bony scutes on them. You can see them here along the back and along the sides. And so they're kind of like the dinosaur, how they had bony protrusions. They, I'm sure, are very helpful with predation when they're, other fish are trying to eat them when they're small. They get very large, so that problem goes away, I'm sure. But these, especially on the small fish, can be quite sharp. But the sediment in the water and after a while kind of dulls them. So in a larger fish like this, they're not nearly as sharp. The neat thing about sturgeon is the historic record, the fossil record indicates they evolved back about the time of dinosaurs. So the sturgeon that swim by us here in Edmonton and down south, their ancestors swam with dinosaurs walking around. So very ancient fish, pretty cool that they're that old, hundreds of millions of years old. One neat fact about sturgeon, if you've been on the river, you might hear a large splash or even see a fish come torpedoing out of the water, and they'll jump right out of the water. And people don't really know why they do this. They believe that whales do that to remove maybe parasites, but not really sure with sturgeon if it's a communication means or like they don't have parasites, so it's not that. So maybe it's just fun. Some people speculate. So yeah, neat fish. They're octopoids. So what does that mean? So we're probably most familiar with our biology, which is we're diploids. So male gamete, female gamete. So one end comes together, and that forms a viable human, which is a diploid. Sturgeon are octopoids, which is pretty unusual. So it makes the geneticists scratch their heads when they study sturgeon, because they even have trouble figuring out the gender of sturgeon because their genetics are so different and complex. But yeah, neat fish. So Where do they live? In Alberta, they live in the North Saskatchewan River. We do have the occasional report of fish getting as high as Rocky Mountain House. They can't get above the Bighorn or the Brazeau dams, of course, but we're lucky they have a pretty continuous stretch of North Saskatchewan River down to the Forks and even up into the South Saskatchewan River. Our fish are able to live. And Owen Watkins, doing his master's work, was doing some telemetry work, and we recorded a fish in one summer that left the Genesee area, which is just north of Edmonton. That summer it went down to the Forks, so where the North Saskatchewan and the South Saskatchewan River come together, and was back up to Genesee. So big migrations. In the South Saskatchewan River, they're more limited by dams, so they can get as low as Lake Diefenbaker, and then up to the Old Man and the Bassano dams in the South Saskatchewan, and we are catching more and more fish in the Red Deer River. Lake sturgeon get huge. That photo on the right, I've got this window here, I'm just going to minimize it. This is, you can Google this. It's a fish that was caught in the Roseau River. It's a tributary to the Red River, which flows north to Lake Winnipeg. And this fish, according to the record, weighed 406 pounds and was 15 feet long. They get huge. A while ago, there used to be harvest of sturgeon in the South Saskatchewan, and this fellow, Harry Muscovich, this one weighed 105 pounds. So I guess Harry wasn't the tallest of guys, but they do get massive. They spawn in late spring. They're kind of like us. They mature sometime in their 20s, hopefully. The females a little later, 24, 25. The males can be even in their teens, and they spawn every 5 to 7 years. So with that sort of biology, they're vulnerable to overharvest, and that's where the story goes next. And they're also highly migratory, as we talked about. So in Alberta, there's a long history of sturgeon harvest. They were sought after for meat. Their swim bladders have a compound that they can make into, it's called isinglass, which is supposed to be really good for settling out sediment in beers and wines. I'm sure there's something else they use now, but yeah, so sturgeon were probably sought after. They were even used to burn in ship boilers because they're oily, and that would give them a fair amount of power. But very quickly they're overfished, and the population collapses happened. I think by the 1940s there was the government of Alberta closed fishing for sturgeon in the North Saskatchewan, and this is a global theme. They're circumpolar in Asia and Europe. Sturgeon populations have collapsed, and largely because they've been sought after, and their life history of growing, taking a long time to mature and living so long. I got this graphic, and I think it might have been from someone on the call here, but this was some information about water in the river. So this is it's a little complicated, but it's a very interesting story. So the numbers really collapsed in the North Saskatchewan River, and this is oxygen levels on this axis, and this is miles downstream from Edmonton. So in the 50s, oxygen would go to 0. So my understanding of this, and so fish need about 3 parts per million, and 5.5 is best for all life stages. And so in the 50s, oxygen was very limiting for fish. And so the dams got built, and Edmonton did a better job treating the effluent that was going to the river, and oxygen started increasing. Winter oxygen got much better through time. So this I think tells a lot of the story about what happened to lake sturgeon in the North Saskatchewan River, why the numbers got so low. No oxygen. The dams the dams help with oxygen. So before the dams were put in place, these were the flows. And so winter flows were very low, as you'd expect. No melting of glaciers, no melting of snow, of course, and then with the big water in the summertime. With the dams built in the 1970s, it really equalized flows, and I think that helped sturgeon in that portion of the river. So a couple pieces of information that might, explain what happened. So the lake sturgeon recovery started in 1990. This was before my time with Fish and Wildlife, but the story was someone came into the Fish and Wildlife office and explained this strange fish they caught and explained it with a lot of detail. And we often get reports of strange fish, but this person seemed to have caught a sturgeon. So at that point, the work started right away, and our survey program started. So this is Daryl Waters here in these photos, and one of the studies that he did was a telemetry study. So we used the fish to tell us where important habitats were. This is a radio transmitter, and we recorded where they went. Moving on, the status of sturgeon, they are listed as a species at risk in Alberta. It's threatened. That was in 2007. There was no harvest after 1990. There was that closure in the 40s, but there's been no harvest since 1990 in the NSR and the early 2000s in the South Saskatchewan River. They have been recommended for listing federally. And just another shout out to the volunteer group, folks that help us out with marking of sturgeon. We have a group of people that have been super helpful, dedicating their time to catching, measuring, and individually marking sturgeon, which has been the backbone of this program. And yeah, so the best way to catch sturgeon is by angling it. They have that mouth that doesn't seem to be damaged at all by fishing. They tend to be very resilient to fishing, and whereas tangle nets have been used, but that can be harmful for the fish. So our volunteers and staff, when we do more intense surveys, use angling. We do population estimates and determine the distribution of fish in the river. And we collect things like lengths and ages and that sort of thing. So the good news is there's an upward trend in lake sturgeon numbers in the North Saskatchewan River. The goal, of course, with the species conservation is recovery, and there seems to be somewhat of an up trend in this is the upper portion. We've up of from Smoky Lake is the upper, and downstream of there is the lower. And the lower sections indicating an increase. And then the South Saskatchewan River is showing an increase. So this is year, of course, in number of individuals. Not a lot of fish yet, but good signs of recovery. From Daryl's work and Owen Watkins' work, we followed fish, and they've told us where they like to live. So we've determined very important habitats in the river. And so we work with industry to try to mitigate any sort of development that might happen within these areas, working on those habitats. I wanted to talk quickly about our program that we did this past summer and we'll be doing next summer on the South Saskatchewan River. So to do a population estimate, it's pretty challenging because of where fish live, the number of fish, the area that we have to cover. So what we do, and if you can picture a bottle of marbles, if you took a handful of marbles out and took a marker and identified each of the marbles and put them back in the bottle, shook it up again, and then pulled out another handful, eventually you'd start getting some of your marked marbles back. And from that, you can do some mathematics to come up with, how many marbles there are in the bottle. And this, population estimates came out of actual pond studies where they did that, marked fish, and then drained the pond and counted every fish in the pond and came up with numbers. But it's pretty challenging on a floating system, or sorry, a flowing system, because the fish could immigrate from down below, or they could emigrate out of the area. So it's some of the challenges. So we're doing an enhanced survey this the next 2 years. So what we're doing is we're intensively marking fish when we know they're not moving very much from our telemetry data. So the thought is that the fish aren't moving out of the area. So it's more indicative of the larger area, and so we'll look at the intensive work versus the large area to further refine our estimates. It's a lot of fishing efforts. So we needed about 1,200 rod hours this summer, and then all the volunteers provide a lot of information. So it looks like this summer's work was a success. So we're pulling those numbers together right now. So just to summarize, they're a vulnerable species because of their biology and where they live and some of the threats that they have. The good news is trends were increasing in our 2017 reporting, which is encouraging. We're providing habitat protection to sturgeon, and I'm very interested to see what we get once all the data's together from the North Saskatchewan, the South Saskatchewan River. And our update should be out in 2024, and we post all that stuff online. So I would encourage you, if you're interested, to look up Lake Sturgeon. Our older reports should be up there, and if not, I can provide them to you. And once again, another huge shout out to our volunteers for all the work they do on their own dime, and that's what really allows us to get this done, because it's a big area and a lot of time to study sturgeon. Yeah, with that, I'll end. And do we have time for questions, or?
Take it away, Kelsey.
So yeah, we still got a good 10 minutes here. And yeah, there's definitely a few questions for you, Stephen. Thank you for the great presentation. This is from Catherine. Do sturgeon still move through Edmonton? I think you kind of answered that a little, but can we help in any way by establishing any spawning habitat?
Yeah, so Edmonton's an important place for sturgeon. We've identified some very important areas for sturgeon, and they are using the Edmonton area all through up to Drayton Valley. But as we get above the city, the river becomes more of an erosional river, where with clean rocks, and it becomes more of a trout stream. So they tend to be much more concentrated in the slow water further up, but certainly in the city and downstream is getting into better and better sturgeon habitat. So as far as can we create more spawning habitat, but that's an interesting point. So the numbers are so low, we don't really encounter many spawning fish. We believe we know of a couple, 3 areas where they spawn, and we've got some old timers that have told us they've seen them spawning. We've caught females that are quite ripe there, but we actually haven't seen them spawn. But I don't think at this point we figure spawning habitat is limiting. It's just there's not enough females and male sturgeon in the river. So as the numbers build, that might become limiting. But right now, I'm assuming there's in the hotel, there's lots of empty rooms for them to use, so to speak, for fish habitat.
Awesome, thank you. A good, well-rounded question. Are there trends in river water temperature fluctuations or direct effects of industrial or other effluent discharge, in addition to water chemistry variations with seasonal flow? That was from Claudia.
That's there's a lot there. Yeah, so there is in-river monitoring. If you go to Alberta rivers, there's certainly flow data, and I believe there's some temperature data. And then I think that the river monitoring group collects more detailed information on the river. So there are some threads you can pull out there for getting more information. Effluent discharge, yeah, so that an industrial being would need to have some sort of approval, and with that should be what they're discharging. But I'm getting onto shaky ground here now. I'm not really sure of all the what's involved there. So something that we could follow up on if you're interested.
Sure. Another one from Raquel. What is the evaluation of habitat built in the Dawson Park area? Any evidence of kind of lessons learned, and what factors are you focusing on to build populations?
Dawson Park. Okay, yeah, I do know the DFO had, so when someone does something that might change habitat, they need to compensate for that loss of fish habitat. And I know that Department of Fisheries Oceans had one industrial user of the river build some sort of spawning structures within the river. And I think they went back and looked and tried to find sturgeon eggs, and I don't think they found anything on those spawning structures. So yeah, unfortunately not a good outcome to that story. But as I said, numbers are building. A lot of the fish in the river now are quite young, and as we get more and more fish, the hotel will get more and more full, and I think we'll see more spawning activity throughout the river. So not necessarily it didn't work, but maybe just not enough fish in that area to use it to any degree.
And I think, yeah, the poll question was, how long do sturgeon live? And then I think, yeah, what was like the oldest documented, I think, sturgeon as well, if you know that.
Yeah, that's an interesting one, because that's something we struggle with a little bit, because sturgeon, they're super long lived, and you'll see in the literature quotes up to 150 years old. And I really question how they got a good number on that. Like that huge fish from the Russell River, it must have been ancient. But we use fin rays, and unfortunately, as the fin ray gets bigger and bigger on the larger fish, the inside where the first, like it's like a tree. So we look for annuli, and so we do a cross section of the fin ray, and we count the rings, and just like a tree trunk. But the fin rays on the bigger fish, the inside starts becoming ossified, like it becomes kind of bony, and it's difficult to read the rings. And so the older fish are pretty tricky to age, and then they slow down as they grow, and so the rings are really stacked up on the older fish. So we've got fish that people have claimed are 80 years old in our database. It's kind of tough to come up with an accurate age. And with other species, fish biologists have used like really cool techniques like radioactive nucleotides. And so, like, this is crazy, but when they test a bomb in the Pacific Ocean back in the 50s, there'd be a certain radioactive signature to it, and that would go around in the atmosphere. And so if that's detected in a fish, then you could say, well, it's at least this age, because that's when that event occurred. So kind of challenging to say, but yeah, there's reports of 150-year-old sturgeon.
Awesome, thank you. And I'll pass it to Kayla to wrap us up.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, guys. Can people see my screen? And Kelsey just like say yes. I can't see you for some reason.
You're good to go. It says the
Oh, right. Yeah. Next slide. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Lesley and Stephen, for your exciting and educational presentations. Someone who grew up fishing for walleye with my grandpa, it's been great to kind of learn about other fish populations in Alberta. And just so everyone knows, we'll be providing the PowerPoints for each presentation in PDF form, along with the recording of today's webinar. So if people came in a little late, that's okay. We got that covered. And yeah, so we're gonna move it along to do our gift prize winner, do the draw for that. We randomly selected one person, and just a little virtual drum roll here. The winner is Catherine Shear. So congratulations, Catherine. And if you can share with us your email in the chat, or maybe stay on the webinar for a little bit after, and we can contact you on how to provide that prize to you. So yeah, awesome. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. There will be another Watershed Wednesday webinar on December 7th. The topic will be aquatic species monitoring, and one of our speakers will be Dr. Patrick Hannington from the University of Alberta. So you can sign up for the webinar on Eventbrite, and also if you were wanting to, you can sign up for our newsletter on our website. The URL is just kind of provided here on the slide, and that will help you stay updated on future events and information about NSWA. So yeah, stay tuned for more, and we hope that you guys enjoyed this presentation as much as we did. So yeah, thank you. Stop sharing my screen.